Well, I called and so someone liked it, someone didn't like it. That was a different thing because we only had 15. Who said, well, I got a shirt that cares about that. You want to be being close to water and having those it's like anyone's word.
You can hardly see it.
So we're all just telling straight. Our district, we have 50 just telling, we're just elected. So,
It's not maybe a public remark.
So Kelly doesn't have obviously that's what you're afraid of.
What's going on right now?
One guy, two guys. I'm trying to listen to so there was of course,
I'd like to also think so we can appreciate this. We're better off probably just because of that. But it's not people have to pay about taxes to others because we understand that taxes we pay throughout.
they didn't want to be Are you kidding me?
Should always be a conversation, but
I do think it's going to be satisfaction. It's always a even we came in 61.
That was the year after the last time the Democrats served in the seat.
I know. That's what we were saying.
From where did you come from? What time?
St. Cloud, Great Park.
Oh, there's some St. Cloud, right?
Are you guys?
my whole family seems like
There we go. See, that's what I think. It's all about ranking together.
I grew up in Great Park.
I'm a Shrifles, so yeah, there's lots of Shrifles up there.
I never.
This is fun. Thank you all for being here. Glad I got to make some magic.
Yeah, I think
Talk amongst yourselves.
I used to play baseball in Gene Trace.
Sure. My relatives. No, but it's probably a relative.
Yeah.
my sister, cousins. They live in, my sister lives in St. Joseph, my parents live in St. Cloud, my grandmother lives in St. Cloud, and then I have cousins in St. Joe.
I'm not very good, but I read that last
That's where rental properties are.
Up there, I mean, we've been a good series. This guy's even since we were and I see talk to people. Some of the conversations were great.
He's as radical. I didn't have a chance to read it, but there's trouble in the Wells.
They're doing a lot better than they have.
Yes, something about the board was the voice to me. Yeah, I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
My son has to take a switch and he takes me
One of the two other guys really closest to Wells.
But nobody knows what vacation up in the Lake Country there?
And then usually, and they don't know.
To give a report of how
They're asking.
when Wellstone first started,
they play the Lakers tonight.
I stayed with him for a couple of years, and then it just kind of dwindled away. Because I like him, just dropped. But I was sad to see that Osseo was so good now.
My son's going skiing. So we get to golf.
I've got 3 right here. We don't have one. I'm ready for that.
So it's like,
Yeah. It's just like being a grandparent. You sit to the aisle and then head back on.
Very busy people.
There's 4 girls, there's 2 that live a mile away, and the other 7 are across.
Just got very quiet.
Well, we have it. And then my daughter had it.
That's what's gonna happen. We all
She's really.
Darn it, yeah. Your last name
She's going over in crop. Okay, it's like of a guy?
Yeah, they do.
It's like, okay, for 15 years or whatever, you have good employment. And after that, you have all the good life.
Because it has these behaviors.
Yep, I actually sell for Lennar. Yeah, so I actually. Well, I work in the corporate neighbor just down 101, so it's corporate area. Yeah, 2 minutes from where we live. So you see, Lennar acquired a company called Catlantic, and they have neighborhoods everywhere, and they're all rebranding Lennar in the next 2 weeks, So we have 81 communities in Metro now. So everywhere you go, you'll see a Lennar. We were the biggest one, but now we've doubled in size.
Did you want stronger coffee than this? I like stronger coffee.
It's nice, so I just work in that community. So
Trying to see if, what the name of this particular character.
Just regular residential.
I don't like espresso. Do you like espresso? Yeah, see, but I love coffee, but like coffee ice cream, coffee flavored candy. I don't know why. It's just, give me that straight coffee and I'm happy. Not the espresso. Oh, it's so late. For somebody new. Okay, and I think I was. Oh, I like
Well, hello, everybody. Hello, class. I'm really grateful that you all took the time to come out today. It means a lot to me. I think we might have one more coming. But nonetheless, thank you. To be almost 9 months from the next election and to take time out of your days to spend it with me is particularly wonderful. And these are strange times. It's not going to be an ordinary election. And as Bobby Kennedy said back in 1968, and participation is everything. And I will tell you that if I've had an epiphany during the last 10 months of campaigning, it is that the legacy of this administration will surely be people recognizing that we have a responsibility in times like these to stand up, to engage, to extend invitations to others, and participate. And I mean that for thoughtful Republicans and thoughtful Democrats. People recognizing that when you entrust government and governance to others in times like these, that's when it's time for us to play a role. So I'm grateful to all of you. With that, I thought I would just begin with a little bit of my background and tell you my story and why I'm doing this. Share with you a few things I've learned on the campaign trail so far. But most importantly, I want to hear from you. I believe that representation begins with listening, which is something that a current representative doesn't do a whole lot of. And that's what I've been doing for the last number of months. I'm now converting that listening to action, starting to formulate my policy prescriptions and perspectives, and tend to be a very aggressive but thoughtful campaigner in an effort to bring a Democrat back to the seat for the first time since, anybody remember? 1960.
Wow.
Which is why I drive my 1960 International my truck, my government repair truck. All around. Now, I didn't drive it today because I had a dead battery, which, by the way, in the hierarchy of problems that I face with the truck sometimes, a dead battery is the lowest end, the best news I could have had today. But I drive this around to engage people in conversation. And one of my overarching mandates, personal mandates in this campaign, is to get people to talk again. I don't want to be the Democratic version of Eric Paulson. I want to represent an entire district, and that means spending time with people who don't always see things the same way. And that's how I learn. I learn something every day from people who are both like-minded but equally important from those who are not. And that's the spirit of this campaign. So with that said, I was born, strangely enough, on the day that Richard Nixon was inaugurated, January 20th, 1969. My parents, Artie and Dee Dee, met at St. Paul Central High School in the early 1960s. And my dad, Artie, grew up in St. Paul. To my grandma Ruth was his mother. She was a single mother, worked at Kohl's department store in the Highland Village to make ends meet. And Artie went to the University of Minnesota on an ROTC scholarship because he lacked the resources to attend school otherwise. Hey, everybody. You get to hear my horse shit all over again. And he went to undergrad at the U and then also law school, and was deployed to Vietnam as a captain in the U.S. Army before I was born, and he was killed in action. I was 6 months old in July of 1969. And my mother was 24 and widowed, and we moved in with my great-grandparents in St. Paul for the first 3 years of my life. And at which point my mom remarried Eddie Phillips, a remarkable father who adopted me, and brought me into an extraordinary family, the Phillips family, of great blessings and business achievement and philanthropy and wonderful principles. Some of you might know that my adopted grandma was Dear Abby, the advice columnist. Yeah. And I tell you, as a little boy, I grew up as a grandson who would visit her in a beautiful home in Los Angeles, and my grandma Ruth in public housing in St. Paul. And I recognized disparities at a young age. I couldn't understand them, and frankly, I understand them less now than a young age. But I lived that fine line between advantage and disadvantage, and that very much illuminates this run for Congress, and the recognition of how these disparities have not narrowed, they have grown for far too many people. And I think in this country, we can do better, and I intend to do just that. When I was adopted, we moved to Edina, where I grew up, playing hockey down at Walnut Ridge Park, went to Edina Highlands School. And I was brought up in a family that taught me to value hard work, taught me to judge people by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. And most importantly, hey, welcome.
Hi.
You can take 2 of those donuts if you want. Now that I ordered you. And taught me that success is not to be measured by how much we collect, rather by how much we share. And those are principles that were taught to me at a very young age. And I worked hard. In high school, I worked at Runyon's in downtown Minneapolis. I was a busboy and a barback. I used to, on the weekend, my Sunday morning job at Runyon's was to get up on a ladder. Any of you been to Runyon's in downtown Minneapolis? You know the place? Yeah, okay. They have hundreds of picture frames all around the whole bar and restaurant. And my job was on weekends to go up and clean the glass on every one of these picture frames, back in the days when people smoked. And I'll tell you, there's no better way to convince young people not to smoke than to put a picture. It made a big impact on me, you can imagine. And I started my own mobile car wash service one summer. I worked at our family's print shop for a couple more. Went to school out east for 4 years at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. And when I came back, I started working at a small startup business in Edina, where I was born, a little bicycle apparel manufacturer, for a couple of years, and then joined our family business. And I started in our production department, making schnapps. So if any of you had a bad batch of peppermint or snowshoe grog in the spring of 1993, I apologize. That was me. And worked in our warehouse picking orders, and went to school on the weekends at the University of Minnesota pursuing my MBA, which I achieved, and worked my way up and ultimately managed the business. And in our family, we were taught also that business is a means to an end, and the end is not just making money. The end is taking great care of the people with whom we work and the communities in which we live. And I'm proud that my great-grandfather was one of the first in this country to start a documented employee profit-sharing program in the 1940s, which I keep on my desk as a reminder, the original documents. Then we acquired a little gelato brand called Talenti, which we built into one of the country's biggest ice cream brands. Any of you know Talenti? Yay, good. Favorite flavor?
Thank you.
Yay, double dark chocolate. I like that, chocolate. Yeah, double dark. You're welcome.
Thank you.
And then more recently, I opened a couple coffee shops with a business partner called Penny's. We have one in downtown Minneapolis and one in Linden Hills, right next to Edina. And I'm proud to say at Penny's we pay people a $15 an hour minimum wage, a livable wage, plus tips. Thank you. And we do so not because it's easy, because it's not, and not because we have to, because we don't, but because it's the right thing to do. And I want to inspire other businesses to take good care of people, because I think well-run, thoughtfully managed businesses can be solutions. Not part of the problem, but be part of the solutions. And And it is hard. And I also want to remind everybody, including in this room, that government can do well by people and has a responsibility in many cases, I believe, to do so. But I'll tell you, the real power is with all of us. The choices that we make every single day, where we spend our money, which coffee shop you go to, where you buy your hardware, where you eat your dinner, or where you get your food. These are the decisions that we choose to make every single day that have profound impacts on people's lives. And I'd be remiss if I didn't encourage you all to think about how you spend, because that can change a lot of people's lives in a big way. So I'll turn my attention now to November of 2016. I, like all of you, were watching those returns with a great deal of shock and dismay. And for the first time in my life, I felt a concern about our country and democracy that I'd never felt before. I watched it with my family, including my teenage daughters, Daniela and Pia, who were particularly distraught by the outcome of the election. And I remember waking up the next morning and at the breakfast table telling them that I was not going to be a complainer, that I would participate. I didn't know exactly how or in what fashion, but I resolved that very morning to do something. And over the course of the next number of weeks, I started investigating Eric Paulson and recognized quite quickly that he is someone who I believe misrepresents both his district, our district, and himself. And it deeply, deeply concerned me. When he took the vote on the AHCA, the American Health Care Act, that in particular, that was the camel, or the straw that broke the camel's back for me. And I resolved then that I was going to run for Congress and try to unseat someone who I think woefully misrepresents this district. And that's what I've been doing over the last number of months. And I'll tell you, I believe that the Constitution anticipated a president like this one. I do not believe our Constitution anticipated a Congress filled with so many members who lack courage. Especially now, this is when you measure the fortitude and the courage of those who we elect. I don't care what party they are part of. And that's what deeply, deeply concerns me. And I encourage all of you, as you assess candidates in this next election, to consider that. In times like these, who you want representing you. And that's why I'm running. I did not anticipate this to be a career. I wouldn't have imagined a year and a half ago I'd be doing this, as you can imagine. But times like these beg for participation, and that's exactly what I'm doing. I do want to say that I started this out of anxiety. Did any of you anxious over the last year and a half? Yeah. Well, I share it. And I thought that this is the best way to convert anxiety is into action. And I'll tell you what's really fascinating is I was anxious, I was angry, I was disappointed. But as I have driven around this district in this little truck for the last 10 months, meeting with people every day, every single day, from the most extraordinarily wide-ranging walks of life and backgrounds and perspectives, I'm very pleased to tell you, everybody, that I'm more hopeful. I'm more hopeful than I was even before this last election that troubled me so much. Because I've come to realize that just about everybody wants the same outcomes. Just about everybody I talk with, despite their political label, whether they're conservative or liberal, wants the same outcomes, wants safety and health and access to health care that's affordable and high quality and good schooling and safe streets and a safe country. All the things that are important, clean environment, clean water, clean air. And I've come to realize that there's something wrong here. And it's time that we start sending people to make a better Congress. And that means, again, from both sides of the aisle. And that is an opportunity that I did not even realize existed, because the media would like to portray this as a very, very divided country, and certainly both political parties portray this as a very, very divided country. But I'm going to tell you, everybody, that when I talk to people, we are not nearly as divided as those people tell us. And I encourage you to extend invitations to your friends and neighbors and families to start talking again. Because if we only preach to the converted, we have not done anybody a service. Our job is to welcome people. We should be a country and culture and people and communities that intentionally engage people who don't feel the same. And if we do so, then we will be the greatest country in the world, and then we will make America great again. That is my belief. I want to share a few things I've learned policy-wise, and then I want to turn it over to you. I'm going to start with what happened yesterday in Florida. I've been tweeting and posting for 10 months as a political candidate. And I got to tell you, I'm sick and tired of thoughts and prayers. And it has become deeply, deeply troublesome to me. And I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed for all of us. I'm ashamed. And as I posted today, I'm ready to take action because this is nonsensical. This is nonsensical that in this country, in this day and age, there have been 200 shootings in schools since Sandy Hook. And I'm appalled. I'm appalled at our U.S. Congress for having done absolutely nothing. You know, forget about people like us in the room. We're talking about kids. And if both political parties don't have the wherewithal and the intention and the fortitude to get something done in this case, then shame on all of us. And I mean that sincerely. All of us. And I intend to be a voice of change in this area, everybody. I support the Second Amendment. I do not want to take guns away from people who are law-abiding, particularly in rural areas where I understand why the need for guns is certainly enhanced over those in urban areas. I understand, I respect that. But my goodness, everybody, what we're seeing happen, the pattern, and the fact that it can be solved is what's really, really disappointing to me. So as I called for today, I want to see universal background checks. 90% of this country agrees on the universal background checks. I want to see mental health professionals in every single public school in this country, not just to prevent gun violence, but we have generations now growing up with extraordinarily challenging mental health conditions that we can address at young ages and create a much healthier future for all these kids. I want to see anti-bullying programs in every school, because if you look at the pattern of who's going back into these schools and doing it, there's a pattern, and we can do better. We can do better by these things. You know, we have to allow the federal government to, especially the Center for Disease Control, to start investigating why this is happening, and also make recommendations on how we can solve it. And last but not least, and this is going to go to my which is usually my number one point, campaign finance reform. No matter what your number one issue, every one of you in this room, no matter what your number one issue is, I ask you, I implore that you consider campaign finance reform as your number two issue, because we will not affect any change that is important to anybody in this room until we do. If we don't withdraw and reduce the influence of affluence, the role of money in politics, the corrupting role of money in politics, God help us. And all you have to look at is the votes and the money. And I encourage you, when you get home tonight, go to opensecrets.org. Look up any candidate you want. Opensecrets.org. You can look up the role of money by industry, by candidate, by donor, by elected official, and you will be dumbfounded by what you discover. But it will make a lot of this make sense to you, because there's a direct line, there's a quid pro quo, in my estimation, between a lot of the big money in politics and a lot of the votes. And that's why the fifth item on my list to help solve this gun violence problem is campaign finance reform. Because you all know the gun lobby spends countless millions of dollars and has an expectation that when they invest in your campaign, how you are going to vote. And that is where we have to start affecting change. Healthcare for all. I cannot believe that this country has not made the moral choice to ensure that every single American is cared for when he or she needs it, no matter your age, your income, your condition, or your geography. We should make that choice, I believe. The question, of course, is how to do so. And in my estimation, the best way to begin taking steps in that direction is to expand Medicare as an option for everybody, as an option. That way, people can buy into it. And if Congress would allow Medicare to negotiate pharmaceutical pricing, which the VA already does, but of course the pharmaceutical industry, which spends over $250 million a year lobbying members of Congress and tens of millions more enriching campaign coffers, they don't want to see those changes. But Congress can do it if we simply act. So that is my proposition. I believe that will improve access to care. I believe that we should also start focusing on the model of our delivery model. Right now, we reward hospitalizations and procedures. We do not reward prevention and quality. And as everybody in this room would probably agree, until we change how this whole model works, we're not going to have higher quality care at lower costs. We're going to have higher costs. And the fact of the matter is, healthcare consumes 18% of our economy right now, everybody. That's double just about every developed country in the world. And our outcomes are mid-pack. If you're somebody of great means, your outcomes are generally outstanding. And we as Minnesotans are amongst the most fortunate, not just in this country, but in the world. to have world-class healthcare systems right in our backyard. But of course, not everybody's so lucky. And the fact of the matter is there are a lot of countries in the world that would shock you where the outcomes on a lot of health conditions are better than ours, despite how much we spend. And then I will finish on this with pharmaceutical pricing. Until we let Medicare negotiate pricing, the fact that we, as Americans, subsidize the entire world's pharmaceutical pricing is, to me, nonsensical and unreasonable and unfair, and it has to change. And again, public education. I believe that is the first promise of being an American, I believe, is a world-class education for every young person who wants it. That's what made this country extraordinary. This is what set this country apart from every other country in the world, was our public education system. And we, just in the 3rd district, everybody, in the 3rd district, we have to fund about $147 million every year in unfunded federal mandates relative to public education. IDEA, which is special needs funding, has never met the threshold. I will argue strongly for that. I believe it's time to put mental health support and professionals in public schools. It should be an imperative. This is a national health crisis in more ways than I can articulate in front of you. And I believe it's time to elevate the role of teachers. Are there teachers in the room right now? Wonderful. And I am so grateful. It is the most important profession in this entire country. And I believe we should raise the esteem, we should raise the compensation, and most of all, we should start attracting the best and brightest young people to pursue that path. Because as you all know, it doesn't matter how beautiful a school is, it matters how wonderful the teacher is. And that is, in my estimation, what will make profound differences as we move forward. Lastly, the environment. I talk to a lot of young people every day, and you can imagine, they want to talk about environment first, because they rightfully recognize that if we don't take care of it, none of these other issues matter. Nothing matters. So I tell many that we did not leave the Stone Age because we ran out of rocks. We left the Stone Age because we came up with better ways to do things. And we have those better ways to do things right now. Wind energy, solar energy. I just met with one of the senior executives at Excel Energy last week, and we talked about them decommissioning coal plants. Not just because they're great people, but because economically it makes sense to do so. And they're investing now in wind and solar because of thoughtful federal programs that have provided incentives to do so. And we can make this transition away from a fossil fuel economy. And it's a win-win, because we will create millions of jobs around this country. It's already happening. We will save our earth, and we will rely on renewable sources. And Minnesota is very well positioned, thank goodness, in that area. Clean water. The Clean Water Act has loopholes that have to be closed. The fact that we're still talking about this troubles me. 20 million acres of wetlands and 2 million miles of streams are not included, and we have to do so. And we should rejoin the Paris Climate Accord.
Yes.
Not because it is the end-all be-all, but because the United States of America, in my estimation, should be at the forefront of principled leadership around this world. Boy, I agree. You do that every time I make a profound statement. And I want to close with women's rights. I was just reflecting, my mom and I were just having a conversation about the Equal Rights Amendment. I remember that button she wore when I was a little boy. And Congress passed it. 35 of the 38 states, I believe, that were required to have ratified it. And yet, 40-some years later, it hasn't been done. And if there ever was a year and a generation in which we should get this done, it is right now. And I'm a defender of women's rights, access to healthcare, reproductive rights. I'm pro-choice, and believe it is time to make the right choices as a society and get that done in the ERA. It's high time to achieve that, and nonsensical that we haven't. So with that, those are a few of the issues that I have elevated and I share with you, but I would like to hear what's on your mind. You can ask me any question. Most of all, I'd like to hear ideas. I'd love to hear your ideas about policy ideas and what's most important to all of you. So with that. Oh, yeah, and I do want to introduce Nate. Yeah, this is.
I always get my introduction.
Nate is one of my best friends because he follows me around to events like this, any public event, and films me on behalf of the Republican Party. And Nate's a good man. I just want you to know. He's doing his job. Democrats do the same thing to Republicans. It's not a part of campaigning or our political system that I think is so wonderful, but it's part of the deal. And I just want you to know that that's where cameraman is, and he's doing his job.
Thanks, team. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was at an event once. I was at a picnic, a Senate district picnic or something last summer, and it was a potluck. And Nate comes to film me and maybe a couple others, and actually brings some coleslaw. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Why not? I have the food, I might as well bring some.
So look, hey, if Nate and I can be buddies, I think we can get back on track. So anyway, questions, but just to make you aware. Yeah, go ahead.
A few months ago, when I first heard about you, I read that you were independent.
Oh.
And I like that, to be honest. But when I hear your spiel, I think, boy, that doesn't sound independent to me. That sounds like Democrat.
Oh.
So,
Yeah, I am a Democrat. I'm a passionate Democrat, but I'm also an independent-minded Democrat. Yeah. So, and by the way, I'm glad that was your perception of me, because I think we need more of that. I think we need more of that, and I say that in a very thoughtful sense. Independent-minded meaning I'm not beholden to a party. I'm not beholden to big donors. I don't take money from special interest groups, from political action committees, or federal lobbyists. So that's what makes me independent. And by the way, there are only 6 members of Congress out of 535. Only 6 that don't take money from those groups. So that is, when I say I'm independent-minded, that's indeed what I am. But I'm a proud Democrat.
So expanding on that point, because this is how you're campaigning and showing up here. So you're talking to us rather than listening to the donor class. So what other vulnerabilities does Eric have that you can take advantage of? I don't know how you're going to win.
Okay, how are we going to win? Well, I'm going to turn that back to you, because I'm a candidate. I'm one person, and this is what a campaign looks like. So when I say it's not me winning, if we're going to do this, it's going to be we doing it. His vulnerabilities are multifold. He's been doing this for 30 years, the better part of his life. He's got very, I think only a number of months of experience in the private sector. He's a career politician,
Right.
As we all know. He has presented himself, he talks about himself like Jim Ramstad, but he votes like Michelle Bachmann. And when you raise millions and millions and millions of dollars, and you can go on Open Secrets and see where it comes from, I think it's $7.5 million over the last 10 years just from special interest groups. It's very easy to hide behind a television screen and present your most wonderful self. And the fact is, most voters don't pay attention until about 2 weeks before an election. And it's really easy when you've been doing this for 30 years to convince people how wonderful you are. And I don't intend to disparage his character, but I do intend to point out his votes and how misrepresenting they are to this district, how misrepresenting they are to the Republican principles of fiscal responsibility. Look at this tax bill.
Right.
The Republican principles of states' rights by voting to allow conceal and carry reciprocity, which means which means states like Minnesota that have much higher thresholds will be subject to states that have very low thresholds. That violates core Republican principles. And privacy. Voted to essentially allow the FCC to relax its oversight over how our internet searches could be sold to internet service providers, ISPs, and net neutrality. Those are liabilities. But the most important one, if you ask me, is that he refuses to show up.
Yeah, right.
And I think
We found that out the last election.
yes.
And I think it is a fundamental responsibility as a member of Congress to show up and to listen and to let people express their grievances. And that should be, and that's why I've committed already to hold at least 4 publicized, open town hall meetings for anybody to attend, should I be elected to Congress. Not just because it's the right thing to do, because I love doing that. And how do you represent people if you only by the way, only represent 50% of them, and then in turn only the ones that give you a lot of money? Because if you want to see Eric Paulson right now, everybody, If you give him $2,700 or $1,000, you can go to dinner at Crave with him. And that's how it does it. And that's, by the way, he's not the only one. That's how the system now works. So his votes, his inability, or his lack of desire to show up and participate are the important ones. And as you all know, as evidenced by this room right now, and the thousands of people that I see showing up, book clubs being converted to huddles and indivisible groups forming, there's a substantial element of participation right now that has never been seen before. And if anybody went to caucuses, did anybody go to caucuses? Oh, yay! That's awesome. And speaking of educators, one of my favorite, most influential ones just showed up in the room, Steve Johnson, who taught not just me, but also my daughters at school, so thank you. And now I lost my train of thought. Because I'm thinking about all the things I did in school.
You answered.
Showing up. Yeah, oh, caucuses. Just seeing all those hands go up and knowing that over 30,000 Democrats went to caucuses this last week, was extraordinary. And when I would go in room to room to room to room and ask people how many first-timers were here, a third to half the room said first-timers, which says to me that finally we're recognizing it is a responsibility to show up and participate in democracy, and that again goes back to the blessing. And that's why we will win.
Hey there. My name's Joe. I'm a school counselor.
Hey, Joe. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And so I just want to make an encouragement to take your piece on mental health further. And maybe you've heard this. This number is maybe a bit outdated, but the average is about 799 to 1 school counselor in Minnesota. And a lot of that is simply because they just don't exist at the elementary level. And even as a high school counselor, incredibly important work, but it's more than just get them to college and do that paperwork and planning piece. So I really challenge and encourage you to fight to make sure every single elementary school has a counselor presence, so we can identify and support early, but just basic things like empathy. Imagine a middle schooler or a high schooler moving on without having that skilled empathy, communication, addressing needs and wants. So anything you can do on that behalf, greatly appreciated.
Thank you, and thanks for what you do. If I just ask you too, what are you seeing? How are young people presenting? What kind of issues relative to their mental health right now? And do you see trends or?
Absolutely. I work in a school. I already mentioned it's not necessarily relevant, but in the past 5 years we've had 4 deaths by suicide. And so it's just tragic and heartbreaking. And you can have so many supports and resources in the school. We can't play God. We can't know everything and solve everything. However, I've been in a school where I have about 250 to 300 kids, very fortunate to have that number. And a kid had a tough time. She was walking out in the street over in Brooklyn Park and wanted to end her life. And she held back, and she had a relationship with me. She came in the next day, got her into an ambulance. And then this year, she came back and spoke to 1,000 students in our community to say there's hope and there's opportunities. And that really was with the relationship. So that it's not really saying much with me, but the trend is anxiety big time. And a lot of our culture is that everyone must go to a 4-year college to be successful. And really supporting that there's different paths with the trades, that your life is not defined by where you go, it's defined by what you do with what's in front of you. So a lot of it is, I run small groups for grief, anxiety, depression, transition, things like that. And when I survey the students, of about 800 students, over 100 say they have some need and some interest. Every semester, anxiety is the #1 factor for our students.
Thanks for sharing that. I want to reflect too on, hey, welcome guys. Thanks for coming. Paul Wellstone worked very closely with Jim Ramstead on mental health issues. This is a couple decades ago. And after Paul Wellstone died, Jim Ramstead played an outsized role in ensuring mental health parity with physical health. And I want to elevate that again. And one thing you learn in campaigning is that you can't wave a magic wand and affect all the change you want to. But you start seeing patterns and you start seeing opportunities to affect a lot of issues by investments in certain areas. And I say campaign finance reform is a foundational element that we have to fix. And I think mental health support at young ages would save this country extraordinary amounts of heartache and heartbreak and costs down the road, the same way that early investments in early childhood education do the same. And this should be bipartisan, it should be nonpartisan. Mental health issues know no party. And I'm glad you say that, and I intend to significantly elevate it, particularly in schools, and particularly thanks to what you just said in elementary schools. So I promise you that. Thank you. Yeah.
I am really concerned about the deficit. And I believe in all these extra, like opioids and, you know, all the money we're pouring into that. But how
I
do
think we
we,
just went bankrupt.
how do we find the balance?
Yeah. So, you know, I'm one of the greatest surprises during this campaign for me is that recent tax bill vote that was sponsored by the Republican Party. I'm really surprised that a party, and particularly a representative, Eric Paulson, who has for the better part of his entire career, you know, made deficits part of his platform and eliminating them. So I'm deeply troubled. Adding $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion is likely. And now the budget proposition by the President of the United States will only make that worse. We need sanity. And maybe it's time for the Democratic Party to own fiscal responsibility again. And combine that with social inclusion, which is the tent I'm trying to build. And I am troubled. We're lucky we live right now in a very low interest rate environment. And that's not going to be the same forever. Anybody who lived through the 1980s knows what can happen. And should that happen again, and there's an interest rate spike, a lot of our budget will be consumed by interest payments. So I'm deeply troubled. And that's why that tax bill is of great concern to me. It should not have added $1 trillion more to our deficit. And I think we can all agree on that. There are parts of it I do like, a lot of it I do not like at all. The deficit is a significant challenge for me. And we're in a circumstance where if we don't effect some change soon and start collaborating on it, we are going to be at a disadvantage economically around the globe. And there is time to course correct, but we got to get to it. And I'm afraid that the people in the White House in particular have no sensibility relative to doing so.
But to press you a little harder.
Please.
So
How to do so?
where would you cut? Where would you, I mean, what do you think Congress should do? I mean, just
Sure.
more revenue isn't the answer either.
No,
I mean, that's not how we got into
Look,
this.
I believe in fair taxation. I believe I'll give you an example. The essential reduction, elimination, if not reduction, of the estate tax, which is a couple $100 billion, I think, over some years. That to me was nonsensical. Nonsensical. How that money can be. Think about the things we just talked about. Mental health professionals in schools as a perfect example. What if we dedicated that instead to something, you know, productive? I will tell you, it's like running a business. Anybody who runs a business, small or large, knows that there's never one lever to pull to affect all the change you need to. It's a lot of little levers. And that's the truth in this budget. And we have to have more thoughtful tax policy. I believe that if this tax bill had done what the GOP originally proposed, which is a corporate tax reduction, which I think is actually good for this country, and couple that with meaningful middle income tax relief and benefits, that would have actually stimulated the economy in a way that I think we've never seen before. Because if tens of millions of people have more to spend, a lot more to spend, that raises all the ships. And that's how, to me, an economy is stimulated. I can tell you right now, owning coffee shops, that if people had more money, and by the way, that tax bill is certainly going to hurt Minnesotans and it's going to hurt 3rd District Minnesotans more than just about anybody in this country, which is why 12 of Eric Paulson's Republican colleagues voted against it in high-tax states like New Jersey, New York, California. 12 of his Republican colleagues recognize that this would do a disservice to them, as it will do to us. Had instead that really helped the middle class. More people would come in and buy a couple more cups of coffee every month. Go to Valley Fair with the kids in the summertime a couple more times, right? That's how you raise an economy. That's how you actually generate more for the Treasury, in my estimation. And yeah, we got to make some hard choices. We've been using a national credit card, everybody, for a long, long time. I remember as a boy hearing the same things on the news. Deficits. It's not something we can fix easily, but we need leadership that can start balancing a budget and at least start moving the ship in the right direction. So I do not have a singular proposition to you, and never trust someone running for office or serving office who says they have an answer, because this, my friends, is not something that's easily fixed. That means we have to course correct and start making inroads, the same way that anybody in this room who incurs personal debt has to do. You don't pay it off tomorrow. You change your spending habits modestly, and you work hard, and you pay it off over time, and we have to start making a course correction, and that's how we can do so. And I think there's a responsibility of those who are very successful to participate, and every American has a role in this. But we can't keep using a credit card. And as a Democrat who wants to help people whenever he can, you know, we all have to recognize that we have to do so with some degree of fiscal responsibility. And that's all I can say.
I think as a nation.
In the back after.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
What is your feeling on the Social Security situation? Now, the government, we had a surplus. They took the surplus to balance the budget. Now the payment is due, okay? And they're saying, well, that's something we can get rid of. Republicans have never liked Social Security. They've always been against it. But the thing of it is, it's helped this last recession we had. If it wasn't for Social Security, this country would have been in depression.
Agreed.
I've got a suggestion how to do something about this.
Please.
Is that you take whatever you pay in Social Security, okay, you take the cap off. Everything, okay, but the employer, because it's split, I think it's 7.5% for each one. If right now, anything over, I think it's 115,000, I could be wrong.
127, I think.
Okay, well, whatever it is. Anything above that they contribute into Social Security, the next year they get a 1099 as a contribution. They can write it off on their taxes. But everybody's got to pay into it, but the employer stops paying at that time. And one of the things that Reagan did was to increase that and put an inflationary clause into it. That was a good thing. But let's continue on with that plan.
Agreed. I think, what, is it a 2% increase this year? I think it's
Yeah.
2%. Yeah, you know, my values and principles dictate that Social Security is one of the most important American promises. And I meet with, as I say, I meet with people every day, and I've talked to way too many people who entirely rely on their Social Security income to live. And you can imagine, and maybe some of you in this room, you know, might be in that same position. And that's tough. I know that's tough. And it's my responsibility to not just preserve and protect Social Security, but to enhance it. To enhance it, especially for those who rely on it. You know, and I want this to be a more compassionate country. And it begins with us making that choice. And it begins with us. There's too often we talk about, you know, Congress and government as them. It is a mirror of us, everybody. The choices that we make, the people that we send to Washington, are the ones that can affect these changes and preserve these programs that are so important. And Social Security should know no party, because the beneficiaries are everybody. So the best way I can answer your question is to let you know how important it is to me to preserve Medicare, to preserve Social Security, and to, most importantly, for those who cannot, for whatever reason, disability or otherwise, do for themselves. A compassionate society should make the choice to help them as individuals, and also a thoughtful government has a role to play in that. And that's why I think Social Security is one of the great American promises that needs to be protected.
Thank you.
Yes?
I think as a nation, we gotta come to grips with taxes is not a bad thing. Government is not a bad thing. If it wasn't for government and taxes, we wouldn't be in this building right here.
That's right. True.
Them nice streets out here. These nice apartment buildings right over here. And I think it's about time people start opening up their eyes and looking what our country is trying to go back to. We're trying to go back to a 1930 It's ridiculous.
Well, I talk to people every day, and I can tell you the same thing. Democrats and Republicans all want to see their tax dollars efficiently used. That's not an unfair expectation. And hey, welcome. And that's something. If you look very carefully at our federal budget, if you look very carefully at this current administration and how they're using some of our tax dollars, it's troublesome. including members of the cabinet who are using our tax dollars to fly spouses and to do other things. That deeply troubles me, especially, well, I won't get into it. And I hear you, I hear you. But this is where I find hopefulness, everybody. I mean this very sincerely. This is where I find possibility. By encouraging conversations again, recognizing that we actually all want the same outcomes, to recognize what a privilege it is to be an American, to live in this day and age, in the most extraordinary country, in the most extraordinary time humankind has ever known. If we can get people to remember that for a moment, we can make some progress. And that's how we're going to affect some change, and it is a privilege to do so. And thank you for pointing that out.
What can we do about the fact that Russians are still hacking into our media? I mean, the Facebook things that come on there, there's so many things on there that are not legit as far as what people are saying and thinking. But they get the ire, they get everybody hating each other, right, hitting. So, yeah, you're one person. But what can we do as citizens to make sure that this next election isn't as corrupt as the one that happened before?
Well, first and foremost, I wish we had a president who would acknowledge it. I wish we had a president that would actually empower the FBI to investigate and defend our country from these attacks. Because it is real. It is real. It is real. It is real. And it is not, again, this is a nonpartisan issue. Republicans, for the most part, acknowledge this is real. As someone who's campaigning, I see evidence of some of this nonsense online, and it is terribly frightening. And some of you might have read as recently as this morning, there is now technology that can actually independently, through technology, create stories on its own and disseminate them. There are candidates running for Congress right now in this country that on their own websites are using endorsements and articles that are essentially self-made on fake websites to enhance their positions. And if there's a great challenge that every future generation is going to face, everybody, it's truth. And as a Democrat, I believe in truth and justice and opportunity for all, starting with truth. And if we can't ascertain the truth, we are in trouble. And that means we need good schools. And that means we need an engaged, participating society of people who care and pay attention. And that is a responsibility of all of ours. I make sure to watch news sources across the spectrum for that reason. Because I think it is a responsibility to understand and discern truth for ourselves. So to answer your question, transparency, there are some propositions. Senator Klobuchar has some important propositions to ensure transparency, especially in social media and paid advertising. I believe as part of campaign finance reform, we should ensure that any advertising that is bought, that is seen by voters, should be transparent of who purchased it. And the fact of the matter is, right now, there is a lot of foreign influence in our elections. There are companies that are owned by foreign interests that have PACs that support candidates, as an example. There's fake news that is being disseminated and created all around the world. And it is hard to discern. I understand that. So it starts, though, with a president, and if the president won't do it, we need a Congress who will hold the president accountable, and that's where it all starts in the House of Representatives. And if we don't flip the House, 24 seats, everybody, in November, nothing important to you will change.
Well, why should it? It hasn't changed in 8 years. Why should it change now?
What's that?
I said the Republican Party has had control of the House for 8 years.
9 years.
Pardon me? 9 years now. And with every, they've taken every opportunity not to do a damn thing. Why? Well, you passed Obamacare. These damn Democrats, they passed Obamacare. So we're not going to do a damn thing because we got hustled. No, you didn't get hustled. You got outvoted. Okay? But they've let the country, as far as the legislative body, they've let it go to waste. And no one has said anything about it until now. Because even with their majority in all three, in the two houses and in the White House, they're doing things that really piss people off. And thankfully, we have more men and women now who are, like yourself, that are running for an established seat. Because the man in the established seat is not the mathematician that he said he was.
If I was a math guy, I don't think I'd vote for $1 trillion.
No, that's, you know,
But I want to return to my point, and
Yes.
and that's why in the 3rd district we are known for voting both sides of the aisle, having checks and balances. And that is the role, by the way, that is the distinct role of the House of Representatives, to be a check on the executive branch. That is the role. And if we don't flip 24 seats, there is no check. And I, for one, am fearful of a 4-year administration that is taking us in the direction that it is. So that it is a beginning, it is not the end all, and by the way, that's not enough. That's not enough. We have to go to Congress and send other people to Congress who have ideas and are there to get things done. And I will tell you another great blessing, as I've said 5 times already, then hundreds of candidates around this country have stood up and are participating for the first time in their lives, who never imagined they'd be running for office for the same reasons I am. And I think there's going to be great change coming. There's going to be great change coming. And I've looked at some of these candidates. You will be amazed and excited and inspired by what you're going to see if we can encourage people to do something a little bit differently this time and not just vote for the incumbent and take a chance on people who are bright and inspired with great ideas and great energy, who are going to Washington to actually work together the way that things used to happen. So that is possible, but this is one of 24. But we have to do it in November. Yeah.
What is your game plan for Big Pharma? So, and I'll give you our background.
Please.
So, the person who invented insulin refused to make a profit off of it because it would keep people alive. So for our son, for 1 month until his deductible kicks in, that's $1,000 a month. Now, let me tell you, we have 2 diabetics. So that would be $24,000. That's not even feeding them to keep them alive all year. Think about that. And luckily we have employer paid insurance, but we still have to hit that deductible and come up with that right now because Happy New Year. What is your approach to that? Because here you can talk about the opiates and all the stuff and the EpiPens and people can gamble this, that, the other thing. We don't get to gamble that. That's not an option to not give our kids insulin or they die. So what is your approach?
And I'd just like to back her up because I'm also diabetic, so I appreciate that you brought it up.
And thank you. And I hear this every day, and that's why I'm doing this, because it's abhorrent. And this is not new. What is a little bit new is some of the tactics and the pricing strategies of some of these enterprises that are taking even off-patent drugs and essentially crushing people. And as you all know, the same insulin is available in most parts of the world for a whole lot less. And I don't believe it's morally right, I don't believe it's ethically right, and I don't think it should be legally right to charge Americans for life-saving medicines that are being sold to people in other parts of the world who can afford it just the same way we can for so much less. And I'm going to turn this back. So you asked my game plan? My game plan is actually a strangely simple one in this case, which is every one of you recognizing how much, that's why I asked you to go home tonight, look at Open Secrets and put in pharmaceutical industry. And you will see, I think the number was $240-some million last year, just on lobbyists, or in 2016, just on lobbyists, 3 lobbyists for every member of Congress. Okay, tens of millions of dollars that go to campaigns. Do you think just because out of the goodness of their hearts? No, because they don't want to see anything change. That's how they're making so much money. And by the way, they need to make money. If we want to see continuous advancements in pharmaceuticals, there needs to be an economic profit motive. There has to be. But we can provide that still. But let other countries pay a little bit more and be at parity with us. And if they're not going to do it on their own, yes, we should take congressional action and get that done. And anybody watch the State of the Union address a couple weeks ago? Okay. If there's one part, yeah, it was hard to watch, of course it was. Very hard. But I will mark his words, because the President of the United States committed to attacking pharmaceutical pricing in this country. And we should hold him accountable. Okay? Do I believe it? No. But he said it. And I believe, maybe for the first time in a long time, there's a little bit of energy behind it. But we will not affect that change until we send people to Congress who are not bought by these industries, everybody. We've got to do this. And I don't care if you send me there or somebody else there, but send somebody there who won't take money from these interests, because I don't care what kind of person you are. The system will eat you up. It has eaten up many good people, which is why I'm starting this the way I will end this, which is to never take money from these people. So let's demand that. If we're not going to change the system legislatively, everybody, then let's use our power to send people there who will do it themselves.
How much does it take to run for Congress?
All right. Well, I'll tell you right now, this is going to be a $20 to $25 million campaign between both sides, probably. Half of that will be raised by the candidates. I've got to raise about $5 million. Eric Paulson will probably raise a little bit more than that. Most of it from, I'm out raising him, by the way, almost 2 to 1 from individuals, from human beings. I'm 4 points ahead of Eric Paulson in the first poll. Thanks to my extraordinary team, we've raised $1.2 million only from individuals. This is the most that a congressional challenger campaign has ever raised in Minnesota history to date. Okay? From 4,000 people. It's going to take way more money than it should. And the sad part is it excludes most wonderful potential candidates from even considering doing this because of the system that we have created and perpetuate. And I would argue that we as Americans think that we have the most significant moral high ground, and we're the most ethical country in the world. And I would argue when it comes to campaign finance, we've simply legalized corruption. And we have. So this is going to be a terribly expensive race. It happens every 2 years. Our friends to the north in Canada, a race for parliament, which is comparable to a congressional race in this country, capped at about $180,000 Canadian. Capped. Okay? Here it's going to be 20 to 25 million. It'll happen right after 2 years. The minute you get to Washington, you got to start dialing for dollars again. 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day, you walk across the street in Capitol Hill, you go to a nondescript conference room, you get on the phone, you call people for money. Who do you call? Wealthy people. Who do you call? Political action committees. Where do you go? Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Miami, New York, Chicago. That's how this system works, everybody. And it works that way because anybody elected to Congress who wants to stay in Congress has to play by these rules. Unless you go in playing by your own rules, and that's how I'm doing it differently. So that's why it's going to take a lot of money, but I will make a promise to all of you. We will not be under-resourced. I'm going to do this in a way that is principled. I'm working my tail off every single day, doing readings like this, and raising the money we're going to need to succeed, because I don't hide behind a TV screen like he does. I show up, and I want to ensure that we win this the old-fashioned way, which means I am less important than all of you. I need every one of you in this room, at some point over the coming weeks and months, to invite people to this. Because if we're going to win this campaign, I want to spend the money in an efficient manner, not just on television. I want to do it in a way that inspires people to get engaged, and I want to demonstrate that it's not just the one who raises the most or who has the most, it's the one that cares the most. So that's why I need all of you. But this is going to be a bloodbath, everybody. It's going to be a bloodbath, and it happens in 435 districts all around the country every 2 years. And we wonder why we get the candidates, typically, that we get. Because going through this is not always easy. And I think we should open the doors for more people and welcome more candidates from both sides of the aisle who want to do well. And that's where it starts. Yeah.
What's your thoughts on DACA and immigration, and how would you go about having an influence in that area?
Yeah, I'm outraged by so much right now, including dreamers. You know, should not be a partisan issue. I cannot believe that we're still talking about it. I cannot believe it is being used as a negotiating tactic. These are human beings. You know, and it just disappoints me and appalls me, and I believe it is time to welcome them. These are children that were either brought here by parents and have no choice in the matter, and they are now Americans, I believe, and should be welcomed as such. And I believe that we are a country largely formed by immigrants, largely. You know, I know my family's history. I listened to my great-grandparents tell the stories of coming over and what it was like. And I feel a responsibility, as I think all of us in this room should feel, to remind others to investigate your own family history, because most people will discover that the people that are now in this circumstance were their great-grandparents 5 generations ago. And furthermore, we should be the America that welcomes. And as a business person, I can tell you right now, economically it makes sense to welcome more. This notion somehow that we could even deport 10 to 12 million human beings. Do you know what that would do to this economy? Not to mention our humanity. So that's how I feel. And I don't understand why this is a partisan issue. It shouldn't be one. The fact that it's a negotiating chip is abhorrent, but we, sending the right people there, can get this done, and I intend to make that a very, very significant
But
part
when
of
you talk about mental health, like the gentleman did, is he still here?
No.
The counselor?
Oh yeah, I think you left.
Okay, well, anyway, when you talk about mental health and you talk about young people, and we started a charter school 16 years
Yeah.
ago, and we are diverse. That's our whole mission, is about celebrating diversity and building global citizenship. And we have children from Africa, and children from Asia, and children from South America, whatever. And you talk about anxiety being the #1, and some of them, I'm sure, probably fear for relatives or somebody else that they know. And you talk about building anti-bullying programs. How do you build anti-bullying programs when the top person in your country is a bully? And that's what they see. That's what they see on Facebook. That's what they see in media. How do you calm children's fears when you can't calm your own?
By flipping the House of Representatives in November. Sincerely. So that is the role of the United States House of Representatives, to be a check on the executive branch. Thank goodness our system was set up that way, but if we do not do this, all bets are off. And I've spoken with a lot of these children who still go to school scared every single day. Shame on us. Shame on us. And I mean that personally to me, because I feel a responsibility to try to address it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've asked.
Yeah, did anybody, some first-time questions? Yeah.
Can I go back to the campaign finance?
Yes, please.
If we're fortunate enough to get a sea of blue, progressive blue in 2018, is it possible to quell or get rid of the Citizens United ruling of 2010? Can the House of Representatives put through a bill?
Yeah.
And would it make an impact with how would that, I guess, how would that work?
Okay, so Citizens United, everybody familiar with Citizens United?
Yes.
I'm not an attorney, but I can tell you that I think it was one of the most upsetting decisions by the Supreme Court that I've known in my lifetime in terms of its effect. I won't opine on its constitutionality. I will opine on its effect, and it has been terribly detrimental to our democracy. It has disenfranchised people. The Koch brothers announced just a couple weeks ago that they will spend $400 million between now and November to influence elections. As we all know, there are some Democratic supporters that are willing to spend lots and lots of money too. It's not unique to, again, one side. But the dollars that have been unleashed, dark money, because you asked about this campaign, $25 million, only half of that will be raised by the candidates. The other half is going to come from entities and organizations from all around the country that have no interests in our interests. And that's what this unleashed. I don't believe that corporations are people, and I do not believe that money is speech. That's personal. I do believe that the only way to address this, ultimately, is with a constitutional amendment. Our Constitution has been amended a number of times, as we all know, for thoughtful, smart reasons. It is a living, breathing document. And this decision, in my estimation, if we do not address this, either through a constitutional amendment, which takes many, many years, equal rights amendment, 40-some years, and that's just about simply not being discriminatory based on sex, for God's sakes. So you can imagine how tough this is going to be. And it is going to be tough. But there are some things that we can do. There are some things that we can do, at least in the interim, to reduce the influence of affluence, to reduce the effects of Citizens United. Would I be a proponent of a constitutional amendment? Absolutely. But I'm also someone who wants to get things done, and that means to do things in the near term, to help people who are suffering from terrible challenges relative, whether it's the cost of EpiPens and insulin, whether it's the cost of your health insurance, so many issues. So we got to start taking steps. So I'm inclined to begin taking those steps. Transparency is a beginning, a significant beginning. But I'll tell you, at the end of the day, we're going to have to do make some big changes, and that's going to be a constitutional amendment. And I do believe that this should be nonpartisan too, because there are not Republicans and Democrats, none of them like to sit on the phone 4 hours a day raising money. I think no candidate wants to be subjected to advertising that the other candidate can wipe his or her hands of because it has nothing to do with them. You know, and by the way, that's why I think Donald Trump is president. Because we have disenfranchised an entire generation, if not 2 or 3, of American voters who think their voices don't matter, that their votes don't count, because of all the massive amounts of money that have nothing to do with what is important to them are flooding the marketplace, if you will. And that's why we only had about 55% of the country go out and vote in the most consequential, second most consequential election in this country's history, because I think November will be the most consequential. So I ask and encourage all of you to become vocal advocates for campaign finance reform. Both a constitutional amendment to hopefully overturn one day Citizens United, because that is the only way this will be accomplished, and also to take some short-term steps to be more transparent in how our campaigns are run.
I'd be interested in hearing what you think about gun control and the NRA, and I apologize if you talked about it before we came in late.
I will. I also want to say one more thing on before I forget this too, because this campaign finance reform is also to me included. The engagement issue is really important, because if people voted, I think things would change dramatically in this country. I think we need a national voting holiday. I think there should be a federal holiday set aside when we go out and vote. You take your loved ones, your partners, your spouses, your children, your grandchildren to the polls and remind them that civic participation is really, really important. And I look at the young people in the room, because it's really important. And that's how we can express upon people that this is a responsibility as an American. It's a privilege to vote. And I'd also like to see the day where if you send money to a candidate, you can only do so to a candidate for whom you can vote. Because I don't think it's fair if you live in Alabama or Montana, when 95% of the money spent in congressional campaigns comes from outside your, not just outside your district, but outside your state. This influence is destructive to democracy, and I believe, as an American, you have the right to have your voice heard and your vote count, and I think we disenfranchise people. Now your question, gun violence. And I'm glad you call it that, because that is the issue. It's gun violence prevention that we have to address. And I just announced today, I tweeted and posted on Facebook my outrage, because I'm appalled and I'm ashamed, and I'm so sick and tired of tweeting thoughts and prayers. Because thoughts and prayers don't save lives, everybody. Action saves lives, and we have a Congress filled with 535 smart people that make the choice every day not to do something. And I'm sick of it. I'm really sick of it. And I intend to be really loud. And you know what really bothers me is there will be another one of these. We will forget about this in a couple days. And I think it's a responsibility of people like me doing this to remind people every day. And I intend now to elevate gun violence prevention in my remarks, because if we forget about it and just wait for the next one, and then have the other side of the aisle tell us this is not the right time to talk about it, well, then maybe we should talk about the Sandy Hook victims, because it's been a while, you know? So what do we have to do? I think we need universal background checks. 90% of this country agrees, and yet Congress refuses to do anything about it. Okay? That's a starting point. I think, as I said earlier, we need mental health professionals in every single school in this country. We need anti-bullying programs in every single school in this country. Because if you look at the pattern, the facts will speak for themselves. If you look at the pattern, the perpetrators of these crimes are often students from the school that they went to. And they're people who are disenfranchised and struggling, and we should address that at an early stage. I believe that we should go back to the ban on assault rifles, assault weapons. The ban was in place, and this was not happening.
Right.
And it lapsed, and Congress refuses to act. And I do not want to take away guns from law-abiding citizens in this country. I believe in the Second Amendment. I support it. But this is a different level, everybody, and how an 18-year-old young man can acquire an arsenal like that. He can't even drink a Budweiser yet, my friends, you know? What is wrong with our system when we allow this and don't do anything about it? And lastly, campaign finance reform, because if we don't change it, we will continually have people representing us who will vote in the interest of the people that fill their campaign coffers, everybody. And that's what that's the problem right now. It's the money. Because there's no other way to explain how something so self-evident has not been addressed, except for the money. And you know what I'm talking about. So those are my beginning prescriptions. The last thing, and most, perhaps maybe the most important, is to allow the Centers for Disease Control to investigate the causes of this violence and identify some thoughtful resolution or prescriptions to help reduce it. And right now, Congress is not allowed to provide resources to do so. Okay? And if I remember when I was a kid, traffic fatalities were rising and the federal government dedicated resources to study why and make recommendations on how to improve. So we redesigned roads and lighting. And we encouraged, in fact demanded, that the automotive industry make safety improvements. You know, one person steps on a plane with a possible bomb in his shoe, and none of us can wear shoes through security anymore. But week after week, 200 times since Sandy Hook, people go into schools and shoot them up and we do nothing? Come on. So that's how I feel, and I am going to elevate this.
That's his answer.
Yes.
Davis Bacon, what do you stand?
Davis Bacon. I like, welcome. I gotta tell you, I just toured the IBU training facility.
Let's talk to you about that.
Oh, it was, well.
I'm chairman of the PAC.
Oh, you are? Well, I won't take your money, but I'll take your support. Well, first of all, I want to say that the gubernatorial election is awfully important in the state because we're an island and I want to keep it that way. So that's how I feel about it. But I also want to celebrate the IBEW has a training facility, electrician's training facility in St. Michael. That is, I think, it's been one of the great epiphanies of my campaign is seeing some of these training facilities in the trades, including yours. They're remarkable. I mean, the education that goes on, I've never felt so undereducated in my life, to be honest with you, when I went and saw some of the solar work. But I want to say thank you. I feel very strongly about the role that organized labor has played in this country. It is a responsibility of someone like me. I am pro-business and I am pro-labor. And I'm out to demonstrate that they are not mutually exclusive. This notion that if you're one party or the other, you have to take one side or the other is nonsensical. And we have built businesses by taking good care of people. The role that labor plays in this country is extraordinary, and I think it has a wonderful future, and I intend to be a very, very vocal proponent. Yes, John.
I think you're a really good candidate to get behind.
Well,
I've seen a lot of candidates around, and I think you've got some real substance, and I think you're going to be carrying the ball all the way to the end.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you in Congress.
Thank you. I saluted Steve Johnson, who has known me since I was a little boy. John Wexler here. He's been from the very beginning. You know, when you undertake a journey like this, there are certain people that are there from the beginning and come to events and you see their faces, and they make the tough days a lot less tough, and they make the great days a lot more great. And you're one of them. I'm grateful for you. Thank you. And as someone who, a Gold Star son who lost his dad in Vietnam, your service and sacrifices means a lot to me. So thank you. And I think one more question.
This isn't
So it better
a
be a good
question.
one.
It's not even a question, it's a statement that all of us here need to know that you win by getting out the vote.
Yes.
And so what we need to
Yes.
do, all of us, is to work not only ourselves, but other people, whether it's telling, calling or whatever, to get people to the polls to vote.
Thank you, that's good. I'm glad you said that. So let's close with this. About 35% of this district identifies themselves as Democrats. Okay? 35%. I would argue that that's not enough to win an election. If every single Democrat went out and voted. Which means that we have to extend, those of you in this room who are like-minded, extend invitations to independents. Extend invitations to Republicans. If any of you want to host a little gathering, a handful of people around a kitchen table, in a park, in a living room, and want to invite your friends who see things differently, that would be the best of all worlds. Because part of this campaign is to remind people that participating and listening to others is really important. That's the first step towards affecting change in policy. So yes, we need to get Democrats out to vote, there's no question. Which is why I'm spending a lot of time in parts of this district that candidates haven't spent a lot of time in the past. But we, and I ask you as an invitation, have an opportunity to do this on a much more broad scale. To extend invitations to other people to vote in this next election, because I believe it to be the most consequential election in this country's history. Because we have the information now. Donald Trump is for real. He's our president. And if we only, well, the 3rd district has a lot of good it's a high turnout district, but we can always do better. And if we want to affect change and flip 24 seats, we need to. So I'm grateful. This room got a little bit bigger as we started, from the time we started, and that means a lot to me. So thank you. In fact, may that be a metaphor for this campaign. It starts the morning after an election with anxiety and anger and disappointment, and an idea that maybe it's time to stand up. And you do so, and a community forms, and a family builds. And may that be our legacy, every one of you in this room. I invite you to join us in doing so, and celebrate with us in November. Not a victory, but celebrate a step in the direction that we need to take, because this is not just about winning and losing. This is about doing better by people, and I would love to have all of you on this team. So thank you all very, very much. Heartfelt gratitude, and let's get this done, but I gotta tell you, let's have fun, because that's where the hopefulness and optimism comes from. So thank you all. I'm gonna stick around for a few minutes. Huh? Oh, last importantly, thank you. In the spirit of having fun, we have built a campaign ice fishing shack called the Government Repair Shack to complement the Government Repair Truck. It is sitting on Excelsior Bay. Our grand opening is Saturday afternoon from 1 to 5 p.m. I will be there from 1 to 5 p.m., so come say hi. We'll be serving coffee and probably cocoa and have some treats. And it's a way to get people to come out and talk. That shack doesn't say I'm a Democrat, doesn't say I'm a Republican or Libertarian either. It just says Government Repair Shack, and it's invitational. And you'll see some great memorabilia inside of Minnesota in its best days. I've invited Dave Durnberger and Walter Mondale to come out and fish together.
Wow.
You know, a return to the time in Minnesota where Democrats and Republicans worked together, debated, hashed it out, argued, broke bread, and made progress. And the most important thing on the wall is that Time magazine cover of Governor Anderson holding the fish. Because that's what I remember as a kid. And I feel that's my responsibility to return to. So come on out Saturday, bring your friends and family, and let's have some fun. So thank you, everybody. Thank you. Very, very much.